Welcome to Wellness Radio with Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher as your host. Her show discusses topics of health, wellness, and spirituality, and is about discovering your place in this great universe, from your cells to the cosmos. Along with her guest, in casual conversation, she strives to ask the difficult questions that may be holding you back from a vibrant life, and shares new ideas that may inspire you to make a change in your life that you only can see in your dreams. And now, here is Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Radio. This is Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening. Tonight we are going to be talking about the time around loss, death, illness, loss altogether of our life, people in it, our tribe, so to speak, our family members and our loved ones. What happens when it is sudden? What happens when it has been planned out, when we've had some time to be able to resonate with it in our thoughts, or still other times when we say, I'm never ready for it. I just don't know what to do with it. So I kind of just sit, and either I become very angry at God, at the people, at myself. Perhaps we might also say, I just don't know what to do, so I shut down, go away, and hide. What do we do when we really need to be able to engage with others in our family or our friends, or perhaps how do we even hold death and loss in our own hearts? My guest today is Aly Bird. Her book is Grief Ally, Helping People You Love Cope with Death, Loss, and Grief. Aly, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Dr. J.
I'm so glad to have you, Aly, because I think that you and I have definitely been around death. We have noticed it. We have felt it intimately. But also, too, we wish to help others through the process. And I think that's so vitally important these days because people are saying there's a lot of it around. If we look in the year, we're now in the year 2023. Who has not been touched in the past several years with knowing a loved one, a friend, a coworker, or just seeing how death has touched society? Don't you think perhaps, Aly, that death is something we would like to not use, but we also are seeing it and feeling it and touching it, and it's not so good for people?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more that death is more present than it probably has been in a long time. And I think that is stirring up a lot for people, just this unawareness that we've had for so long about that, you know, death gets to happen behind closed doors. And now it is out and we are talking about it. And it brings up a lot of uncomfortable emotions. But they're also very human. And I think it's important to bring into the conversation that, you know, death is a part of life and we can't have one without the other. So it's important that we find ways to work with it, to feel it, to engage with it in ways that feel the best for each unique individual person.
Right. You know, I've spoken about death, and my work is with patients at end of life. And pretty much we try to approach it as we are eternal spiritual beings. This lifetime is but a chapter in our book. It is a time in which we engaged. We came here, we loved, we lost, we journeyed, we had adventures, we hit a lot of holes, and we did some great things. But then it's time to go through the door and go on to your next story. And I think sometimes when elders have really been at that position where they're walking through this time in their life, they need something to hold on to, and that feels comforting enough, versus the old story, as I'm almost 70, the old story is death is this horrible thing, and you better make sure you have your legacy in order, and your obituary is already written, and everything's good to go. And then holy heck breaks loose and all the stories come out of who you really were, what people really thought about you, on and on and on. So I think sometimes elders have a very much different perspective on death and loss. But yet I think, Aly, if you could share your story, because you're much younger, you had a sudden loss at a very young age, and you have a totally different perspective.
Yeah, definitely. So I was with my partner, Will, for 5 years, and he died completely unexpectedly in a hiking accident. Just the fall hit his head in the right way, and that was the end. And for me, I didn't get to say goodbye. He still had clothes in the washing machine, and there was nothing to prepare me for what came next. And I was thrown into the world of grief without any idea of how to live without this person who I had chosen to spend forever with. And I quickly, early in my grief experience, was told to go find community, go find people like you, because now you are living with something very different than your peers. And, you know, at 30
right.
and being widowed, like I was statistically insignificant. Not saying that, you know, death doesn't happen that early, but to be a widow at 30, there are so few of us that there's very little, you know, knowledge or understanding of what it is like at that age. And so I tried to find community. I joined, you know, at least 11 different Facebook groups. And what I was hearing in those groups really hurt me, because the majority of the stories that people shared were of feeling abandoned or forgotten or misunderstood based on their experience with supporting a partner or a friend or what have you through their end of life and then coping with their own grief. And I wasn't having that experience. And I don't know if that is a product of my generation or just the chosen family that I have built around me, but the people who were supporting me showed up with unconditional love, and they made mistakes and kept showing up. And I felt very supported and heard and witnessed in my own unique experience. And that really inspired me to do the work that I do today.
You know, I think death has so many different, as I call it, cloaks that it wears. You know, my son tried to commit suicide 13 times, and each time it got, it almost as if it was prepping me or prepping him for the work that we were going to do. Because he now, the last time he tried, he has a tattoo on his arm. It's 8/17/17, which is 888. Which is the close of an infinity circle. So what he said is that now he helps kids and gang members try to find the value in life so they won't be killing each other. And he says they just don't get it, you know, but he keeps trying. But also, too, I think the idea is a lot of people have anger around the idea of death. How dare God take them from us? And it doesn't matter the circumstances. You know, it was expected they were 105. They were 2 years old. It was sudden in an accident. It was by their own hands. It was by someone else's hands. No matter how you shape-shift it, it's all the same thing. It's you're here, you're not here. That's it. You know, and I think if we can come to the basic conclusion that everything after our breath is a gift, and if we totally are solidified in that every single day in who we are and what we are about, then we can understand how we can support others, help ourselves each day when these things come along. Because, you know, I think that there's a whole lot of dogma out there, you know, me being older again, there's a whole lot of dogma out there that, you know, women are going to live until they're 100 and men are going to die early because they need to go because there's such you-know-whats, you know. That's the way it's always been in the generations, you know. I mean, in my generations, all of the men died in their 60s and all the women lived to 100, you know. And it's interesting when you look back at it. But you turn around and you say, well, what else is going on in the world? If you look at the pandemic, People went into the hospital and they, quote, died alone. And I said, they did not die alone. They released their family and their human beings, and they went to the angels who scooped them up on the other side. And I think we have to have these conversations. And if we can have these conversations, it does something to ease our hearts. Do you know what I mean? So in other words, have the conversations that are troubling you, that are going around in your mind, and see if they are truly valid or if they're just an old story or someone else told you. Don't you think?
Yeah, and I think what you're making reference to is just the idea of like making meaning around death and what it means. And, you know, you brought up the question of like people asking why. And I think in most cases, whether a death was expected or unexpected,
right,
or old or young, that it calls into question, you know, these assumptions or stories we've been telling ourselves like throughout life. Maybe they're conscious, maybe they're unconscious, but it makes you come face to face with the meaning that you have ascribed to your life, whether that is, you know, I am a good person and therefore I get to live a long and healthy life, and that's what good people get to do. And, you know, and then somebody dies in a car accident and you say, like, why did that happen? And it calls into question this belief that you've had about what it means to be alive. And I think no matter how the death occurs in your life, whether, you know, it's your own death that you are questioning or you're asking why someone else died, like there is a meaning-making piece of that. And the way you find comfort and maybe a way to live with that is defining the story. And it can take time to figure that out. Right. You don't get to it instantly. There is a period of exploration. And I think that's where the concept of storytelling really comes in to grief support and bereavement support, is that people need space and safe people to work through these stories of their own life experiences, of the stories that they're hearing from others, to come to a real definition that they can sit with and live with, and that will help them take them to their own end of their lives.
You know, I think it also, too, comes to the point we always speak about quantum physics on this show. And quantum physics, we are energetic bodies. You know, granted, we have a human physical entity that's our density, but we truly are energetic. You know that when you touch someone and you can feel their energy. You know that when you put something in your body and you eat it and you're just going, oh, this just feels funky. Or when you hear something, you know, and you're going, that just does not resonate with me. You know what I mean? So we are energetic beings. And if we understand this first, I think that's the first concept to really nail down. Then secondly, we say those people we allow in our inner circles. If you ever think back on your chemistry class or your physics classes in college, you know, in high school, I've had zillions of them, so I speak well on this. But you think about what is the first orbit around you as the element in the middle. And the first orbit is your parents, your family, the children, your spouses. That's your first orbit. And they are definitely bound together. We think of air. Hydrogen and oxygen make air. That's a really tight bond. But once you get it to water, you know, you can see it, feel it, touch it, and hear it, you know. And then when it drifts away, you say, it is no more. You know, when you take hydrogen and oxygen and you break it down, you know, and after it was water, you can't capture it again to be the same thing. So I think sometimes the idea is that when we lose someone, we're constantly trying to grasp at that other element that has now disappeared outside of our orbit, so to speak. And there isn't any coming back into that orbit with the same energy. So we end up with what we call chaos. Because there's chaos around you. It's almost as if someone unplugged the plug out of the wall and everything is, you know how you used to see in the cartoons that when you unplug it out of the wall and the plug would be flying around in the air kind of idea?
Yeah.
You know, you're no longer, quote, energized. You are seeking, you're discombobulated, you know, you're in a state of chaos. And I think that's a perfect example of grief. And if we could turn it around and say, I got it, that I can understand, and hold on to that, sometimes some of those old stories go away. And sometimes you say, let's take it from the basic core. Your energy source that you were bound to has now dissipated. So you are now feeling what we call the void, just as I wrote in the front of your book. Find me a soft place to land. I am free falling. And that's what happens is you are, quote, free falling. Don't you think?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. And, to go with the chemistry metaphor, grief is kind of like the delta change in the equation, right? You can't go back to the state that you were before, because that would just mean that person being back physically in your life. And we can't do that yet. So there is an element of just trying to, find some sort of new equilibrium. And you do that on your own, but you also can have an easier time doing it when you have people around you who are willing to sit with you in that, really chaotic state while you figure out how to live with, how you're putting it, like this, you're like a new energetic experience. And grief itself is energy as well, right? It can be quite disruptive and even like violent inside your body.
It's that chaotic, what I call static. There's a static there that you feel in your body. It's almost as if you keep trying to plug in the cord, and the cord doesn't fit, or the wire is frayed. You no longer can do the same thing again. And I think also, too, let's talk about the first step, Aly, is that when you have a loss of a loved one, immediately the first thing is everything rushes in. It's almost as if, when you hold your finger in a dam and all of a sudden you pull it out and everything just comes rushing in. Well, it has to, because there's a void to be filled. Yes. When you think about it, you eat, you drink, you talk, you anger, people show up. All these things are trying to fill that void because you are the open void. Healing is when the void has closed and you heal from within. But right now in the beginning is that void is open. So the answer is, do you put up your screen and your filter and allow certain things to siphon through? Do you allow everyone to come in and then make the changes then? Or do you just say, I'm just going to go with the process, whatever shows up? Because you know what? The more I try to rationalize it right now, the more it's just going to take too much of my energy.
Yeah, and I think, those are three great options. I think it's important to remember, too, that the void doesn't exist exclusively within you. The void exists within everyone who the person who died has touched and who had a meaningful impact on their lives, or just a meaning on their lives. People who are estranged from.
But and I think that's important to say too, Aly, because when you think about the bonds that are broken, it's not just you that broke the bond; it's all of the others are free falling too. So when you think about it, it's the very first question is, how does it affect me? What happened? When someone dies, I think the first thing, as elders, they have this list that they go through. Oh, my gosh, so-and-so died. And all of a sudden, in your head, this Rolodex spins. And it says, how did they live their life? Were they good people? Oh, my gosh, it was a quick, so how can I get that too? And I don't want to go down the bad road. And then you see people trying to rationalize it, The second one,
absolutely.
Yeah, and then the second one would be oh my gosh, I'm so glad that SOB is gone. Now we can start talking about truth, And then the third one is the idea of, oh my gosh, they were my savior. They were my person. They took me to the store. They took me to church. I really don't have anyone anymore. Now I'm alone. So I think there's so many varying different aspects. about how people can see, how am I attached to this person, but how were they attached to me too, right?
Absolutely. And I think, too, it's like they're not exclusively, like, attached, you know, in a relationship way. There are systems and processes and routines that people become embedded in that once they are removed from those systems, I describe it as, you know, like losing your car keys, like as if your car keys were a person. But those car keys get you in your car and they get you to so many other places. Right. Yep. So the chaos doesn't exclusively like exist in a relationship kind of way. It exists in a far greater impact about how someone was entrenched in your life.
Yeah, because it could be as close as someone that you share your bed with, as far away as that man was the guy who always got my meat. Now what am I going to do for meat? Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, it's we believe that we live such a closed-off society and that, I'm going to survive, I'm good to go. Yet what we don't realize is that everyone is intertwined in the tapestry. We are all part of it. But yet we seem to think that, you know, hey, I'm only going to reach out when I need something from you and I'm not going to be bothered with you otherwise, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You see quite a bit of that.
Absolutely. And I personally, like, I think that's why it's really important to, like, bring, you know, a level of maybe trauma-informed isn't, like, the right word to use in this setting, but just, like, a level of, like, kindness and respect for people's lived experience, like, as you move through the world. Like, a level of kindness is the basic thing that we can do based on how we are all so interconnected, and what really makes relationships from, you know, as you say, like from sharing a bed to someone, but just like someone at the meat counter, like there's a level of reverence that we have to bring for everyone's unique experience with how they show up in the world.
Let's talk about the process of grief. I think it's the idea is, can you gather yourself up on the inside and just hold your own frequency for a moment? And as you hold your own frequency from the moment, other things will occur outside. You know, things need to be done. People need to be put into their places. Certain processes need to, you know, play out. And that's all part of after and immediately after a death. You know, I live in New Orleans, and here we celebrate life. We don't celebrate death here. It's always been that way. My patients, you know, they could come back from the hospital at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they're to die at home, and the house would be full of balloons and party favors and their family and all of this crazy food, and they might die within an hour, but that's how they wanted to go out. And I think the idea is we can always plan for the best way to leave this world. But what happens when our plans get shattered? What happens when we don't go that way? What happens when things happen differently and things are too early? I think then it really shakes and shimmies everybody in the core, you know, around your core, because they all say, I don't know, I wasn't prepared for this. And then you get a lot of regret, sometimes shame and guilt, a lot of, well, I didn't get to do this and this deserving kind of thing, you know. And I think that's really a time when we totally forget what I said before. Breathe. Everything else is a gift. If we remember that, we're okay. But if we don't, we're stuck with, well, I didn't get to see my kids grow up. I didn't get to see my grandkids. And I'm going, but what was promised to you?
Right.
What is promised to you? Don't you think that perhaps not in the beginning stages of grief, however, along the path, you will start asking these questions? Definitely.
I think there is an inevitable stage of grief that happens, you know, in the earlier days, months, years, where it is a negotiation, right, of living in the chaos and trying to make sense of the chaos. So then you can, it's like, make peace with with what did and didn't happen. But I think that it's important to give yourself compassion as you live in the chaos, for sure. I think there's a lot of even like having this conversation about like, you know, people wanting to be prepared and going a certain way, and then it not going as planned. Like we can have the best intentions for what our grief is going to look like, but only when we get there are we going to know what it is.
Yes.
And to expect anyone to like get to the meaning making fast or to like hope to know, to have the plan of getting to the meaning quickly, takes the value out of the chaotic part, that I believe is just like, it's a bit of a reckoning, with where you have been and where you're going.
Don't you think, though, that that's how humans have always been, quote, I call it trained, because when we get in pain, we want to fix, you know? And if you look back at it, doctors were always the fix. Come to the doctor, I'm in horrible pain, fix it. And if one doctor doesn't fix it, they're going to go to 100 till somebody fixes it. Think about the idea of I'm in pain in my thoughts. You go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Then you'll either get drugs or talk therapy, you know. How about when you get pain in your heart, you go to your priest. Fix my soul, give me penance, my pain, I have pain somewhere. So don't you think, in essence, grief is an experience of pain that perhaps you feel in all of your being? And sometimes some people just want an exit point. Tell me when it will stop. Tell me how to fix it. Tell me how to get out of it, because I don't want to be here anymore.
100%. Absolutely. I completely agree with that statement, that people are looking for a way out of the discomfort that is grief. But I think an inevitable part of grief work is figuring out how to live with that pain. And that's why grief is probably unlike any other like human ailment, because there really isn't a solution other than doing the work of reckoning and making a meaning out of it. And I think that because we have this legacy of our humanness, of being capable of fixing everything or numbing, with, you know, food, alcohol, work, etc., that grief really catches people off guard, because it isn't something that can easily be fixed. It's something that we learn to live with, and we adjust our lives accordingly to live with it.
Do you think that perhaps when we say about fixing it, it's perhaps about filling it with more unconditional love, so that you have love for yourself, but also unconditional love can traverse dimensions. You can touch ghosts and spirits, me being the medium. You can touch ghosts and spirits with unconditional love. You cannot touch them with conditional love. You know, romantic love, I love you if, that kind of story, you know. But when you can traverse it with unconditional love, you can really understand it from such a different conceptual level. And once you do that, then you find that inside of your heart, the heart starts to well up and fill in. You know, so many times people will say, my heart is broken. I'll say, oh, I am so happy to hear you say that. And they'll say, what do you mean it's broken? I have to fix it. I said, it's broken because it's letting out and allowing that unconditional love to flow. Once you can understand that too, then you say, oh, okay, I'm good. It's not, because it's still those old words that we've used. Something is broken and fix it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So we have to fix it. It's this old paradigm kind of thing. So we say, yes, my heart is broken. Fantastic. It's allowing the light to shine. It's allowing me to love others, to love myself, to just sit in the moment. Don't you think sometimes through the process of grief, you just need a moment to just sit with your face to the sun and breathe? And right there is unconditional love. And you can feel,
definitely.
You know, you can feel and touch. You know, I'm sure you've felt it or heard it, or other people have said it, is I can feel their spirit around me. And when is that? when you are in that unconditional love state? Perhaps?
Yeah, and I think, you talk about language and changing the paradigm around brokenness. I think that, and I've said this before, is that part of life is death, and you can't have one without the other. So to say that someone is broken because they are grieving or bereaved, that's not fair. There's no way. There's no way that a human can break from that. Instead, I use a language of like ache and longing, which I feel are much more validating to the experience of living without someone who used to be physically present in your life.
Right.
Yes, but I completely agree with, the unconditional love. I feel that it's one of the greatest gifts you can give someone in grief is to love them while they are in that chaotic state, and love them in however way they are going to figure out how to move forward with their life as they become the person they are, and trying to find meaning in a world without the person that they wish was still next to them.
I think also, too, that brings us to the question, are we always attached to others and we're always someone else's? My children, my spouse, my this, my that, and the idea of ownership, when really these other people are just gifted to us to be in our experience. We don't own anybody. They don't come in with us and they don't go out with us. Do you know what I mean? I think it's important to understand that when we say, sometimes I've said to people, well, I had that relationship and that person's gone now, and, or let's talk about either a divorce or a death. And I'll say, no matter what the situation, look back and say, thank you so much for the journey. I honor your soul and spirit, and we are good. And just leave it at that. Because once you can do that, even if it was a good experience or a bad experience or whatever it might be, you're still able to honor them. And I think to honor that is more of being a kind human than turning around and always having this negative stuff. You know what I mean? Kind of idea.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, we can, that's kind of where people can get stuck is in the past of like, oh, I wish I had done this, or I wish they had done that. And there's nothing that can be changed about that. Like the moment that you can recognize that has happened in the past, and, we were both doing what we could with the resources and knowledge that we had, you come to a level of acceptance. And it's in that moment that you can say, I wish you well, I wish you peace. And that's it.
Yeah. And definitely then what happens, if you hear it at the end of your sentence, there was a period, that's when the time where sometimes you're just releasing. And when you release, you say, I'm not attached to the story or the human energy. And that's when you really are feeling, now it's going to be okay. I still have them in my realm. In other words, they're still spinning in my orbit. However, it's not something that I have to pull on every day. You know what I mean? Sometimes don't you think when definitely. You see people in grief, they keep pulling on it? I want them to come back, so I keep trying. It's sort of like people will come to us, or they'll come to me as a reading. I want to know about my loved one. How are they doing over there? Are they feeling pain? Can they hear me? Can they see this? And it's like you keep pulling them back into your orbit, and that isn't serving their spirit. You need to let them be flying free so that you can then, because, if you look at it, like when a friend and they go away, or you get a divorce or whatever, and you keep pulling them back in, it's still in your head. It still has control. It still is created in your day, and you don't want to do that as consistently, because it's almost like you keep stumbling over the rocks, you know what I mean, so to speak. So it's you keep them there, but you love and honor them. but they aren't something that's always constantly pulling on you and you're not pulling on them. Don't you think that as people go through the grief process, that constant pulling thing will wax and wane?
And I think that's just a natural part of the process. I think that eventually, like with the right amount of support, unconditional love, respect, that someone will eventually be able to maintain a connection with their loved one.
Of your day-to-day. Do you know what I'm saying? In other words, that brings you right back to, yes, I have an unconditional love. My spirit is attached to you, but my humanness in my day-to-day story loves and respects you, but I'm still got to get up and go to work. I still, might be looking for another spouse. I still might be able to say, I'm good to go and I'm okay for today. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I think the word I would rather use in that is and. Like, I still love you and I am looking for a new spouse.
Right.
I love you and I have to get up and go to work so that I can feed our family. And I think that is one of the most powerful lessons that grief can teach us as well, is that living with those two truths and really showing us that love is greater than something that you can physically touch. Like, you talk about like the 5 languages of love, like it's so much greater than that. And you can love someone, you can honor them through the work that you do in your life, through the way you move through your life, and you can still move forward without their presence, their permission, their verbal guidance.
Well, what it is that your identity no longer is enmeshed in their identity. So what it is that their identity goes away. An identity is just, I call it a human cloak. In other words, a spirit and a soul doesn't have an identity. It just is. It's energy, right? So if we step into this being as a human, that's when we get our identity, our name, our ancestral lineage, what we do for work, all of that stuff is, quote, our identity. You know what I mean? So if you think about it, when you pass on, is that identity goes away. It's no longer going to call up the butcher and say, hey, can you tell me what kind of meat to get? Do you know what I mean? You can't call up your spouse and say, I don't know what to do here. Can you tell me what to do? Because you're still going to do what you do in your realm. So the idea is that it's different because the identities disperse. They are no longer enmeshed, right? So when you can unleash that identity, you're no longer entwined in the picture again. Your energy might be still in the same, because when we think about it, all energetic beings are all part of the whole, you know what I mean? We're all part of one. So we can say, yes, we are all connected. I am still connected to those who have passed on by my energy being. However, my human identity is no longer enmeshed in the human identity that you have.
I agree.
So kind of when you can step out of that space, though, and see it as that. This is like a little farther down the road. But when you step into that space, you say, I got it. I feel his energy. I know he's around. But it isn't the identity. It's the energy.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you think that perhaps, Aly, that when we have these other new discussions around death, people will say, it doesn't quite answer all my questions. It doesn't tell me what to do or how to do it. It doesn't tell me what might happen to me or not happen to me or others. Or even, it does share how I can help or support others, but I still am not sure. I think our answer would be, we're starting to unpack the box of the way things used to be, and we're all learning at the same level. Maybe?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that even like the concept of talking about death, dying, and grief used to be a very like taboo subject. Like you didn't do it, like you didn't talk about sex. But we're slowly bringing into the conversation, and I think we can unfortunately thank COVID for that,
right.
that it has brought this to a very personal level. It's not something that, just happens to other people or happens to people our grandparents' age. And the more we can talk about death, dying, and grief, I think the more answers we will all discover.
Right, but also, too, it gives us an exercise, so to speak. You know what I mean? It's an exercise where we could say, oh, I saw that. I heard that. Someone else passed on, and see where it takes us. In other words, instead of just saying, oh, yeah, I heard that and walk on, maybe perhaps allow the conversation to filter through your mind and your heart and see how you feel, how you are projecting into this conversation, how you might dance with it, so to speak. Maybe.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is like a curiosity about it.
Yeah, like open ourselves up more to say, I see it, I hear it, instead of saying it doesn't affect me and walk around in denial all the time. Denial's going to hit you in the door. Sorry, denial is a door. It's a door you could choose to go through, open up, or sit behind. Take your choice, But the idea is it is a door. So if perhaps for every event that passes on, it's something that will bring up in us a conversation, a feeling, an emotion, and explore those. Perhaps?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's an exercise that everyone should really engage with. But the closer you are to a death, I think the more palatable that exercise becomes, certainly.
Right, absolutely. As I was sitting here and we were doing the show today, Aly, there's a beautiful red cardinal, and it's been bouncing around out in that tree out in front of me. Red cardinal and a huge green tree, and we always know what cardinals are. They're all about soul and spirit, And so I'm sure there's been a lot of spirits around that have been just dancing around, wanting to have their voice heard through our conversation. So as you and I close out the show today, we say, can you hold in your heart just that unconditional space and see who shows up for you? Sometimes, as I share with my clients, you could smell, I always smell cherry tobacco. That was my grandfather. Or lilacs. That was my grandmother. Or cigarette smoke. That was a lot of my ancestors, Or, I could be sitting in a chair and I could feel ice cold in a second, and it's 100 degrees here in New Orleans, and that's somebody that's trying to get my attention. So can you say, perhaps, Aly, that if you start to be in that unconditional space, just let your mind and your heart open. Might you, too, be able to feel the unconditional love of your loved ones?
We'll certainly give it a shot.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that cardinal was your message, too. So keep an eye and know that your loved ones are near, and that's what we always want others to know. I think sometimes people feel that they're alone, and I say, if you're a spiritual being, you can never be alone. You're already part of all of this. So just remember that, right?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Aly, can you share with the listeners how to find out more information about your work? That would be wonderful.
Yeah, you can find out about me and my book on my website, alybird.com, ALYBIRD.com. And you can find me on social media at the Aly Bird. And the name of my book is Grief Ally, Helping People You Love Cope with Death, Loss, and Grief. And it's available everywhere books are sold.
Well, it was such a pleasure to have you here today to talk about this, Aly, because I think a lot of times people are saying I'm afraid of it. And people that have been through it before, like myself, and also work with it, it is just, let's lighten up the conversation. Let's understand the deep depth of our pain when it happens, but also, to allow ourselves to extend a hand. And that's what the conversation's about, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having this conversation, Dr. J. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you'd like to find out more information about Aly Bird, her book is Grief Ally, helping people you love cope with death, loss, and grief, please do click on the link on the bottom of today's show page for more information. And it definitely is about being able to say, I feel, I hurt, I lost, and I have a lot of pain. But I also love, and I also know that everything is a part of life. That's what we're here for. This human experience that we've all kind of joined together in, let us just filter through some of the old stories, be able to reach a hand out to others, say, I don't know the way, but I can be here. But also still to others, say, we can just hold hands, we can walk together, and perhaps others will say, I have no part in this. I don't know anything about it, but I'm right over here if you need me. There are many different ways to walk as a companion along the path of grief, and perhaps maybe you too can explore it and have some conversations and be able to say, I don't know about these words, but talk to others, share with others when something happens, and even so maybe start up your own little group that says, I don't know what this is all about, but let's see what it is and explore it. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher. Until tomorrow, have a great day.
Today we discussed many life-changing concepts. Who do you turn to, and how do you know what is best when faced with a health crisis? Dr. Jeanette is a patient advocate. She listens to the patient, the doctors, and the family, clarifies the health issues and concerns, then helps the patient make the best choices going forward. If you would like help implementing change into your life and health, we can talk and see where you are stuck and how to improve the quality of your life. Check the link on the bottom of today's show page or visit dr-jeanette-gallagher.com to schedule a phone appointment today.